individuals about taking on more financing for the Twitter acquisition. But I think more.
Ken needs to be keeping us up to date on how far away he is from his margin call pricing on his Tesla stock, because that's what's creating that necessity. Ken?
Well, you know what? Yeah, you're right, but I don't keep daily tabs on it because it's not a concern of mine whether the deal goes through or not. So I really don't care.
I think what will be interesting to see if it does all go down, who Elon involves will be somewhat interesting. No doubt, a whole lot of Twitter folks in the ballpark of 25%, I think, is a safe, decent guess, will likely resign, and he will be have no problem with that whatsoever, as best I can tell.
Hopefully they'll all come together and build a decentralized version.
And especially if they resign without a package, having to pay a package.
Right. That's why I'm saying he would likely be thrilled that rather than have to force people out that he doesn't like, have them willingly step out.
It is interesting that that's becomes news. I mean, this is a case with any corporate takeover where employees are concerned about their jobs and they're concerned, but it's just gotten way too much press. I mean, Elon doesn't care. There's so many people that want to go work for Elon. There's like no issue for him. He'll just replace everybody if he has to. Wasn't there a CFO who there was a news report about her crying at that all hands meeting
Not
because
CFO, but
Elon was taking.
the head of legal, Vijaya.
Okay, yeah,
That was
that's ridiculous.
she's the head lawyer. She runs the trust and safety. Basically oversees all moderation, who gets banned and who doesn't, and what gets suspended and what doesn't. Is a very key role at the company. Um, so that's
So, Tyler, I just tweeted in the back channel about somebody who joined 2 months ago who left. He was going to drive significant access into Gen Z user base, their product manager. So people have started.
people.
Yeah, but he would have
Let's be
gotten any
clear.
kind of package anyway.
If you have someone who's polarizing and people leave, there will be a tilt to the organization, both in terms of its technology and in terms of its content. So expect a tilt, if you believe in Elon, to the center or to the center right. I mean, that seems to be what will happen.
Okay, next up is a whole other thread. The Wall Street Journal says that the SEC plans to add 20 investigators and litigators to its crypto asset and cyber unit, which was created in 2017 to monitor crypto fraud, taking it to 50 full-time personnel. So I guess it's at 30. They're adding 20 more, bringing it to 50, essentially doubling the crypto asset and cyber unit at the SEC. Agency to add 20 staffers to help tighten scrutiny of unregulated 1.7 trillion cryptocurrency market.
Yeah, let's be clear. The SEC and the regulator has made it very clear how they will regulate this sector. There are thousands of coins or altcoins at this moment in time. And the way that they have shown is they do two things. They pick out the worst and most egregious fraudsters that they can find that are easy wins to send messages to markets. And they pick out those that are the most successful that are then litigated with exceptionally strong lawyers, and they usually get beaten by those lawyers. You just look at the case of EOS, which had a nice blend of the two, an egregious front-running scandal in the amount of $4 billion, and then they won and paid $34 million in fines and were defended by Coolies, who were the doyens of the ICO business back in 2017. So they will continue to take that strategy, and anybody who's not either the most successful or not the most fraudulent will sail on in the middle.
Well, even if they receive a fine, the fine is considered the cost of doing business because the profits usually outweigh the fine. So I think historically they've just done a poor job of aligning the incentives and penalties.
Exactly correct. That in the case of EOS, they doubled their $4 billion in front running money to $8 billion and got fined $34 million. Now, who wouldn't pay a $34 million fine on a $4 billion uh, profit?
Is
Well, it's
SEC
just,
going to
just another
headhunt CoffeeZilla?
well, it's just another example of a government getting excited by small numbers versus the relatively. I mean, yeah. I mean, this isn't the only situation. You can go back to the greed is good '90s and everything like that when they busted some of these other people. They celebrated these rounding error penalties relative to what the companies actually earned.
Exactly. This is why it's just a nonsense, and it's a political nonsense, and it's just not going to stop the wave here, especially when you have state-based actors that are going to come into this market heavily towards the end of this year, which we know is happening with the digital yuan and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Okay, next up, the Facebook plans to stop letting users add podcasts starting this week, removing them on June 3rd, and discontinue Soundbites and its central audio hub. Facebook is pulling out of podcasts, plans to remove them altogether from the social media service starting June 3rd. Okay, next, Bloomberg says they have sources that PayPal was one of the companies that made informal complaints about Apple's NFC restrictions to the European Commission, spurring the EU's formal antitrust complaint that we just discussed, I think yesterday or Monday rather, which was yesterday, yeah. Um, so now PayPal's named as one of the companies that was spurred the EU into action with this antitrust complaint against Apple for monopolizing their NFC functionality on their devices for payments.
I mean, Apple has an almost insurmountable opportunity because of the nature of the integration of the wallet into the Apple experience and the login and the sign in and everything else. So I think it's natural that those companies that are supposed to be in the payments business are going to object to anything that advantages Apple. But I think that it's not going to change the behavior of individuals. They will likely choose the Apple wallet over all others because they trust Apple.
Okay, next up, Google offers to cover $100,000 worth of its Coursera online courses in things like data analytics, design, and other tech skills for up to 500 employees at any U.S. business. Google will provide any U.S. business over $100,000 worth of online courses in data analytics, etc. Sundar Pichai, the CEO, says on Twitter that we're excited to offer Google Career Certificate scholarships at no cost to all U.S. businesses to help train employees in areas like IT support, data analytics, and a brand new certificate focused on e-commerce and digital marketing.
So it's the freemium business model. So it's let us give you attestations, which is what they're saying, certifications. Let us educate your workforce in terms of how to use Google products. Have Google products continue to be the backbone of the surveillance capitalism and the surveillance state, and do what we did with the consumer market. It's pretty smart if you're trying to dominate all computing.
Well, yeah, this is Google's main game is undercut any competitors by giving away the product for free. Essentially, makes it very hard to compete with Google, and they've been doing that from day one.
You cannot compete with free. You just cannot, unless there's only one thing you can do to compete with free, and that is pay the customer. That's the only way you can fix this. And that's why the decentralized world has a solution that the fiduciary world, like we demonstrated just before, with the Twitter board, has to do fiduciary duty towards its shareholders. The decentralized world has essentially a fiduciary responsibility to its network economy and therefore can profit by participating. The the problem is that who in the corporate world is going to choose the decentralized world early versus going with the IBM, Goldman Sachs, Google alternative. Just like people always in the corporate environment it used Microsoft, even though it was a worse operating system. So it's sad, unfortunately, but this is the way that it is until an alternative appears, a decentralized alternative appears.
Telegram's latest iOS app update includes exclusive reaction emojis and stickers for Telegram Premium subscribers, a sign of the company's plans to monetize messaging. It looks like the app is getting ready to make money off of you. For as robust of a messaging app as it is, Telegram does need to make money. So here come the premium
So it
stickers
should
and
be
emojis.
noted that they were prevented from carrying on their process towards effectively a public ICO equivalent, and they had to shelve all of those plans, I believe, which leads them to this necessity to make money through advertising and therefore surveillance. That's your only model if you want to be a freemium service or have people pay, but people don't like to pay for a service that they can receive for free from WhatsApp or for free from Google.
Spotify launches something called Spotify Island on Roblox, the first music streaming brand on Roblox. Artists and fans can go on quests, unlock content, and buy merch all through Roblox. Spotify announced today that it will become the first music streaming brand to have an official presence within Roblox with the launch of Spotify Island. Next is from Vice. Internal documents. The CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control, bought location data from millions of phones in the United States to analyze compliance with COVID-19 rules, especially the Navajo Nation. Newly released documents showed the CDC planned to use phone location data to monitor schools and churches and wanted to use the data for many non-COVID purposes too.
Welcome to the surveillance state. We're just sleepwalking into this, just insane.
What a way to build trust.
Bangalore-based company called Topline, which offers automation tools to help convert leads into paying users, raises $15 million from Tiger Global and Sequoia India. Reuters is reporting that Amazon tells staff it will pay up to $4,000 in travel expenses annually for non-life-threatening medical treatments, including abortions, following Yelp and others. That kind of fits with the Roe versus Wade overturning headline, because now if you live in a red state, you might have to travel to a blue state to have these medical procedures. And
And you
Amazon,
will also lose your privacy because you will have to report to your boss that in fact you have become pregnant, and you will have to, effectively breach some form of HIPAA privacy in order to then qualify yourself to go and have a procedure. I mean, obviously, this information is being released in order to show corporate responsibility towards its female employees, of which I believe 32 million women will be disenfranchised under this change. So this is a major, major news day last night.
Yeah, I think
Well,
historically women have not, for abortions, if they've been illegal, they've just gone underground, and that's increased the risk and danger to the health of the women who are pregnant. So I think it's not only going to be a distance issue, but it's also going to be a risk increase where people are just going to be more desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. So it's an unfortunate turn for women's rights.
the only question I
Absolutely.
have on
And you
this
lose
is,
skills.
would the company, since they're doing this, and this is just a policy question in general, and it could be regardless of the topic, would they be willing to do this exact same thing outside the U.S. for countries where their employees work in, where they have such challenges too?
I don't know, but if they, look at if you look at the state of affairs here in the US, and you also look at what will happen in those marketplaces, there will be no practitioners who will want to go to those marketplaces, and so you will lose expertise in other areas like ectopic
I
pregnancies,
got
like
that, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm basically saying, would they use this exact same policy relating to another nation? So if you are in a country and you work for this company, can you notify them? And then they say, okay, we will cover you to go to the neighboring country. So I'm talking about outside the U.S.
no, no, and I understood the point made. I don't think it has the newsworthiness. I think they're trying to signal to Americans. So I would very much doubt whether they will transport you across nation state lines outside of America. I wouldn't have thought.
But basically, implies that it covers the travel to different states for medical procedures. It's not specific about abortion. So I think the question is about the medical care they can get, not just the abortion. So that means abortion is included here.
I
Great
think the
point.
reason for this release now is because of the abortion point. It's news because it's
Yeah,
relevant to the
but I
cycle.
mean the country issues. It is still it covers for this instance is 4,000 a year. So I mean, even the country for forbidden the abortion and the staff want to go to another country for the abortion, it's still covered by this medical uh, offer, right? I mean, the medical not insurance, medical fees for the employees.
I wonder what the administrative reaction is going to be from these states towards this decision at Amazon. Like, what are the steps that I mean, they're not going to enjoy this, they're not going to like this, and they're certainly immediately going to start looking into taking steps to stranglehold this decision by Amazon. So, does anybody have any insights on what they think the next move would be?
No, but hey, Carl, one other point before you get into the nation state stuff is that they've already started looking at federal, not heavily, but they have been murmuring about looking at federal funding for companies that allow this. So they'll say if if your company supports this, gives that $4,000, et cetera, they're going to start trying to strangle your any kind of federal contracts. And then back to Nicholas's HIPAA. This is not a HIPAA violation. First, you don't have to go to your boss and tell them why you're doing anything. You just say I need a medical leave, and HIPAA applies to the provider, so it's not the data that is tracked. As John discussed yesterday, HIPAA is woefully outdated. But yeah, back to
I think you could. The other thing you can look at is what the state of Florida, and I'm talking about what states will do, not the federal government do. Look what the state of Florida has recently done to uh, Disney, Disney World, where it was able to operate as a little, in essence, city of its own, and they have actually rescinded that. We'll see how that plays out in court and the agreement as to contract breaking or rules on that. But Florida is already starting to show that if you push back, in that example, they were pushing, Disney was pushing back on Florida's law about things you could or could not say to children under a certain age as educators in elementary schools. So we're seeing a lot of very interesting things surface here, and it's going to be very fascinating over the next couple of years.
I think it's
I
also
have
worth
a
noting,
question to
just
the American part of the audience here, coming from Europe and Denmark in particular. I have been very surprised to hear the overturning of the the freedom to decide in each state to legalize abortion or not. And I'm just in a bigger picture wondering, does America still see itself as leader of the free world, the place to copy? Or are you taking, as a nation, a different route? Because to me, as a European and Danish, I'm looking with increasingly wonderment, wondering what is going on and what it is exactly that we are supposed to follow in this so-called leadership. So just a very critical, maybe tiny bit frustrated or even angry remark about how can you even treat women's health in the way that it's being addressed in the United States right now in year 2022. I'm very surprised. Susie from Denmark,
Susie,
over. Thank you.
Isn't it
Susie,
interesting to in the U.S. Mostly conservatives pushing this? It is very interesting to me how they prefer small government, freedom. I mean, you can see from when Trump lost his Twitter account, how everybody was saying, this is a country of free, we can have guns wherever we want, you can't stop us from speaking. But when it fits their narrative, they want big government. They want government to be able to control all these things. So to me, it's like how the same group of people or party does have a sense of what government should be, even though advocating small government in one sense and then another big government in another sense. So that's just quite interesting,
I think
Susie.
conflicting.
what I see is we speak of, and I think that was a great, both of the last two who commented spot on. Um, but what I've noticed over the years, and maybe it's always been this way, is even though we advocate democracy and we advocate free trade, I think what we really care about only is winning. It's whatever the side you're on is winning. True democracy knows that there are times you'll win and there are times you'll lose, but you follow the rules and move on. What I've noticed is we care about winning and not so much about the principles of what we say, whether it's small government or large government or non interference, because both sides enjoy interference. They just care about winning.
I agree with you, Robert, and I think that polarization is a feature of the US experience. But I wanted to address your point directly, Susie, and say, as a British person who came to America to experience what you had sketched out there, this bastion of freedom and liberty, what you realize is, in fact, that America is suffering from late stage crony capitalism, and that the allocation of resources away from healthcare and education and focusing on, as Robert says, winner takes all type of approaches and tribalism between the left and the right, democracy is faltering. And it is clear that the separation of the three branches of government has failed, unfortunately, because the, the decision that has been handed down has been a direct political result of gerrymandering the Supreme Court through the inability to seat Merrick Garland. And, at the end of the day, you are correct. Democracy is failing in America, and it's failing because education is failing. We talked about this yesterday. People also don't have the time to be involved in the politics because it is so violently polarized that you become embroiled in fights. And that's the whole idea of the extremes, is to remove the middle from the democratic process and therefore have incendiary conversations that effectively blunt the government working. And that is where we are in America. And I think people are voting with their feet to get out of America because it is patently not a good place for education, not a good place for healthcare, and certainly not a good place for security.
So voting with their feet, getting out of America. Do you have any numbers on change in that?
No, but I'm leaving.
Yeah, I was going to
So,
say that. I don't
but
think that's true.
anecdotally, if you can go to a European country at this point, even with everything else, the outlook for America if it doesn't fix these systems, is not good because of the number of guns that are in its society and the violence that is endemic in America that you do not find in Europe. You really don't.
Nicholas,
Yeah,
but
but
more
Nicholas,
people
so
in the world want to go to America than they want to come to Europe. That's a fact.
yeah, I agree with Professor
I
Asif.
agree with the incentive to come to America is to make money.
Sure, and to make a life. I mean, to get an education. The anecdote is not data, Nicholas. And from India, I have
That's why I
data
said it
that
was
says the number.
anecdotal.
Yeah, so the number of students of applying for U.S. universities did dip for a couple of years, but it's back up to the numbers pre-Trump, for example, right? So more and more students do want to go to the U.S. to study as well.
Yeah,
And
I
there's a
think
Incentives will
reason for that.
incentives
There's
will
a
drive.
reason
I think
is
we have
in
to separate.
America, regardless. I mean, I live in England, but I can say in America, one thing I was trying to recruit someone to the UK, and this guy is Indian. He did his first degree from India, his Howard Hughes professor in the States with an Indian degree. That would not happen in the Europe. Firstly, second, he said, if I come to Europe, the problem is I'm treated as a second class citizen. He felt whether that's not true, but the fact that he felt that way. Whereas in the US, he became a professor at Harvard. So that's the difference between America and the US, and that's why the rest of the world wants to go to America.
absolutely. I think even as much as we complain all that, it is amazing how many of us, even here in Ethiopia, that a lot of people say no, no, the interference in this and that, but everyone cannot wait to get to America. But even in terms of number, even China was complaining because they send their students to higher education, whether Harvard, Yale, all the Ivy Leagues and liberal arts. Everybody want to get educated into the
Everybody in
U.S.
the
Yeah,
everybody in the top 1% wants to be part. Listen, America is amazing. If you want to make
yeah.
money, it's amazing. If you're winning, it's amazing. It's for everybody else in the country. I'm telling you. So this is an experience as someone living here who's not, not American but born. The issue is that what you're talking about is the top, Harvard this and Schmarvard that, right? You're talking about the 1%. The vast majority of the people in America are not benefiting from all of the things that you've just said. We are privileged, and it is the vast majority of people who are not getting an education, who are paying high cost of healthcare, who are living in the trauma loop, that are influenced by these polarizing messages and these ideas. So when I'm talking about things, I'm talking about it in the macro meta perspective, not in the anecdotal perspective. Yeah, life is amazing here for people who have already proven themselves and who've got into the club. But the club is only working for a very small number of people, and that can only go on for a certain amount of time. That's what I'm saying.
So
And
Nicholas,
that's
I agree.
why, and
Sorry, Aaron. I just wanted to say I agree with you on the economic issues and the top 1% in the US. However, that does not dissuade people to want to go to the US because everybody thinks they can get into that elite group over there. I mean, everyone who could even afford to get access or try or buy their way into the US are still doing it because they're aspirationally, they think they can get into the top 1 or 5 or 10% in the US. So
It's
the
you're a
numbers
very
are not
I
dropping.
think when you look at the financial aspects and all the experiences with students and entrepreneurs that I know several from my community in Denmark who have gone to the US to have their part of the company there or to found the company in the US. So I definitely understand that and I agree with the argument. But I'm just thinking one step further. Do you want to move to the US with your family, have kids there, and have your daughter not having the right to have an abortion if bad luck should have her when she's 16? I mean, it's just, for me, I'm just really becoming more and more skeptical towards the U.S. Over many years. We don't have to discuss why. There's some obvious reasons for that. But in the big international picture, I think that we are seeing more and more countries that don't feel that they are in a safe collaboration with the U.S. because the U.S. are making more sort of like making an inward focus and having, from my perspective, some weird decisions that
I think you muted yourself.
You see, you're muted.
I'll finish the point.
Susie, you
Oh,
muted. We lost her, I think.
I want to follow up
She
on
was
that
just
one.
getting to the punchline. I was waiting for the punchline.
No,
Sometimes you Americans give the world American dreams, right?
Well, America owns the narrative, right? And the
And
media
that's
narrative.
Asia. Even in China, yeah, the top one actually is the privilege rankings, like or sound like children to the Americans. And
I think what Susie's
I,
observing is correct,
however,
though.
yeah, some backlash. Like we Taiwanese, we won't get your nationalities because the war, and it's I know the. Okay, I should stop the topic, but I just said, for us, we can have both nationalities. So sometimes the issues there, we if we can't fix the problems in the U.S., then they take it back to Taiwan to fix it. So for those people who can have two nationalities, that might be one way to fix this. But still, yeah, some I would say the chance of the U.S. some tracks, the laws you are on, uh, yeah, strange way to go. However, many people here, I think those people in China, especially those who are not among the privileged ranks but still rich, want to go to the U.S. because, especially under this pandemic, you see, and they see how their government treat their citizens this way. But yeah, just like Susie said, yeah, if your law continues to bound in a strange way, that way.
Well, can I just? I actually probably prefer to move on to back to tech, but just as a clarification for the people not from the United States, um, uh, because we have this unique system with states. So this is not, even if this happens, doesn't change the thing in every state. So um,
22 we're signed to automatically trigger with the change.
okay, I understand, but there's going to be nine
Only
states.
in some states.
Excuse me, and there's going to be nine states, including mine, where the right to an abortion is codified into state law. So, I mean, it's gonna vary a lot by state, and that, by the way, was the condition before Roe v. Wade. So, that there were states that it was legal, states that it wasn't legal, and I just want to clarify that really for the non-Americans, because other countries have much more. They just do things much more nationally, and they don't have this situation where things vary on a state by state basis. And hopefully now we can go back to technology, because there's going to be 20 other rooms on Clubhouse today dealing with politics. And I
Hey,
don't mind politics. I have an
Ken.
undergraduate degree, but
This
it's
affects every tech company's HR policy. This affects every technology development about whether or not going to build a company in America versus Europe. So it's going to affect a lot.
Chris.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell
So
you why.
can I just ask you guys, those who are Americans here, and then including Tyler, do you think this will change the demographics of the states? So the young people will move to the red states, and
Blue.
that's where the technology companies will boom.
You mean
But
blue? Yeah.
Professor Asif, I wanted to note the scientific data. So I gave you anecdotal data previously. I want to give you scientific data that it says that, although I don't know if people saw this because of the Freakonomics guys, but the miracle in New York that was attributed to Giuliani in terms of the reduction in crime, when they looked at the data, they saw that there was the same reduction in crime for all cities across America. And the root cause was that Roe versus Wade eliminated unwanted pregnancies. And it turned out that the generational effect was felt during his time in office because there were less unwanted children on the streets that effectively solved the crime problem in New York City and all the other major metropolitan areas. So
Major
it's
pushback on that one that could have been explained by lead being
Yeah.
removed from paint. That could
I'm
have been
just
explained by
That's so
video games. That
completely
could have been
wrong.
explained
I
by any
say
of about
I'm
100
just
other
saying
causal factors.
I'm just saying that's the data that came out of the Freakonomics
The data was flawed.
teams.
okay.
So that's interesting too. But that's what their assertion was, that the same effect was felt.
Because crime. Here's real data. Crime in New York City has dropped vastly faster. I mean, other than recently, it has vaster, better crime rates, lower crime rates than Chicago or New Orleans. You know, even in like percentage drops and everything. That you can't ascribe the entire thing to some sort of federal abortion policy from 30 years before. But that's the reason for the reduction in crime. I grew up in New York. And I can tell you that New York in the 1970s is very different today for a lot of localized reasons. I mean, even, and I'm not even a Giuliani fan, but I will give him some credit, and it actually would really goes to Bill Braxton, who was his police commissioner. But because they actually started enforcing quality of life issues, like if you jumped a turnstile, they arrested you to find out if you had outstanding warrants. That has nothing to do with federal abortion policy. I mean, that entire idea that somehow the Roe v. Wade decision impacted um, crime in New York 40 years later, I think is completely absurd.
I'm interested to understand that better, but I thought the data explanations that I read and that I saw, I thought they were quite explanatory over time. I think that it's these sorts of things that do have a long term effect, and I think that that
Well,
was what Susie was talking about. Is these
explain the
changes
difference in
have big
crime rates right
demographic
now
effects?
between Chicago and New York City, because Chicago is a lot more dangerous than New York.
And
Okay, so
Of
and
course, the
it's
world changes, but
I
I'm
live
saying
in Chicago.
policy wise.
I'm on the ground in Chicago, and I completely agree. And what Ken has talked about, there's localized issues that create, let's say, the situation or contribute. And so I think that's the problem. Things have been handled here in Chicago very vastly different than New York, and I agree. It can't be just one policy that has such an effect. Root cause usually has a few contributors. It can't be just connected to one.
Very briefly, I want to
I
just
agree with you. I agree with you. The other thing I would say is that probably gun policy has something to do with this.
very briefly, I want to go back to the earlier points about essentially like America's policy for federal versus state, etc. So one of the things I find astounding from looking at American history is we have an ability to integrate that is frankly a cultural agility that is frankly shocking. The amount of changes that we've gone through, even within time spans of 10, 20, 30-year time spans in our history, they almost look like completely different cultures or completely different histories, and yet there are consistent things going through it. Now, this isn't always is something that comes out essentially free. The number of crimes we have had with genocide, eugenics, etc., are horrifying. The groups we've conquered overseas, etc. What the other thing that's what's fascinating though is the fact is that once at the end part about this, there are very few empires in history that have managed to integrate this many cultures and do so successfully. There are very real drawbacks to this model. However, one thing I find that's really interesting from the cultural standpoint is the idea of I want to say you can buy culture, but the idea that we have been willing to try so many different models and that we have been open to that. What you see right now is a bit of a backlash to some of the more recent versions of things, where whether or not certain policies favor one party or another. Very briefly, I want to say that when we're looking at if we're bringing up abortion as a thing, it's worth considering the economic implications of what parts play where, not just by the federal policies, but what happens at a state by state level. That is going to drive more politics than almost any other component. And
You
so when
know,
you look at that, it's going to drive essentially where the tech gets developed long term.
we were talking about Americans renouncing their citizenships, and we talked about crime. We've talked about education. But I would suggest that it's actually a lot more of the 1% that's leaving, or people with money, as opposed to those that are disenfranchised because of the resources they have. And a lot of it has to do with our tax-based system. So I'm looking at numbers right now from the U.S. Treasury Department. And the year 2000, we had 431 Americans renounce their citizenship. And in the year 2020, which is the last numbers that I could find, it was 6,707. So clearly, there's a trend upward, and the trend really shouldn't surprise anyone. As I said, the U.S. tax system is the most rapacious in the world. It's also the most aggressively enforced. For many, the benefits of U.S. citizenship no longer outweigh the costs. And here's the other thing that most Americans don't know: the U.S. is the only country in the world that successfully taxes its citizens, no matter where they are in the world. Even if they leave and never step foot in the country again, it's called citizenship-based taxation. And I think there's only one other country that does that besides ourselves. So if you're a U.S. citizen, you know it does give one pause for thought that citizenship-based taxation is a ball and chain attached to your leg, and it also makes one reconsider just how free we are. I've often said that the United States is the USA stands for United Socialists of America, and I think that the taxation is a big, big factor in people renouncing their citizenship.
100%.
Yeah,
Infatti is part of that.
I mean,
exactly.
the reality though is that most people who have dual citizenship, they live in a country where the tax rate is higher. So all they have to do is fill out the form, and it takes 5 minutes, and you send it in, and you don't actually have to pay any money at all.
That's not a lot of people. That's not a lot of countries.
But guys,
Coming from
just
Denmark,
check
where we
numbers.
have a
We're talking
basic
under
tax
10,000
of
people a year. That's a
42,
small number of people.
if we have a
That's
basic
actually
tax
not
of
true. I mean,
42% of the income.
most of the people who have U.S. citizenship are Canadians, and well, I have dual citizenship, and that's all I do.
I just want to make the point of heavy taxation in the US, as a Dane, where we have a basic tax on everything, that is 42%. And of course, if you are poor or good at have a good lawyer, you can make it lower. The maximum tax, I think, is 60 something when you are rich and earn a lot of money and don't have a good lawyer. And we have a 20% VAT on everything. So I don't think that people are flying the US to go to Denmark, at least, but that's more of a joking attitude towards it. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, the other country that I found was Eritrea. They also have a citizen-based taxation. They're
Yeah,
a
but even
tiny
there's
country, and it levies a 2% flat tax. So the U.S., on the other hand, does have the ability to enforce, a very Byzantine type tax system anywhere around the world. And I think, if you're worth millions, hundreds of millions, that is something that does give pause for thought. And okay, Canada might have a higher tax system, but that's just Canada, 20 million people in the world. Most countries don't have as high a tax system as the US.
Well, it's
Really?
40 million, and that's
That's
also true of all of
I'm sorry, 30
all of
million. Okay,
Scandinavia
woo! And the country is
and
world is
Denmark,
7
as we
billion.
heard, and
this
a lot
affected
of other places.
6,000 people renouncing their citizenship in 2020 for reference. This is only going to affect like ultra net wealthy, like super way up there people with things. So I think this is kind of maybe a little
Yeah,
bit
the
different.
middle class guy is not, he's not thinking about leaving because he doesn't have the means to do it. Even though his dollars would stretch much, much further in other places, around the world. And, we have a psychological barrier as Americans, like, oh, we're the freest country in the world. I remember I spent a few weeks in Muscat, and I left my wallet or my cell phone. I don't remember where. An hour later, I came back and it was still there. And the people were very gracious. I felt very safe. Then those same people that hosted me came over to visit me here in the States, and I took them through a tour of DC. And my female guest was like, "Oh, Washington's so beautiful," and because it was at night and the Capitol building was all lit up. I didn't have the heart to tell her that 3 or 4 blocks away from the Capitol, you wouldn't walk alone for fear of your life. And the fact is, outside of the United States, most people think it's dangerous in the United States. And I think anybody who's done extensive international travel knows what I'm talking about. Traveling abroad, I think, is like the best thing you can do to realize that there's some great places to live and you can feel safe and your cost of living is so much less.
Yeah, America's one of the few places you can literally live in like 8 different countries inside the same country. I mean, like it's just going from Seattle and comparing that to Austin, Texas, or comparing that to somewhere in Kansas. They're different. It's almost different places. You just have some shared values across the entire thing, but it's difficult to characterize the entire thing from going when you're saying like travel internationally. That implies inside the United States as well. It's radically different from Miami, Florida, all the way up to New York. And those are the major cities. When you start going inside the rural areas, it's going to be very, very different.
Also, Americans can get a
Guys,
hundred.
we're talking about a country that capitalism is everything, but look at the system. Look at the research and development. More than 80% of development in medical fields was, in the United States. Yes, it has the highest tax rate and stuff, but on the other hand, uh, I'm an immigrant here, and I moved to the U.S. 2014. Now I'm running my own business, making $1 million because of the system. Yeah, I'm paying tax, and I'm super happy because whatever in the system that I could, I did, and like hard work and everything. So I used to live in Germany, and it's uncomparable. Tax and everything. I guess we have to pay if the system is right. If we can get benefit off of it, yes, we have to because the system, it's based on capital.
Perhaps, Navid, but if you decide one day that you, as an American citizen now, would like to open a business in another country, as an American citizen, the United States government makes it incredibly difficult for you to do that. And they will monitor you. They will check on your bank accounts, and you may not even be able to open a bank account in another country as an American citizen.
Mm,
I think that
you
I'm not sure because I mean there are look at all these multinationals everywhere in the world. I mean, and if you flip actually the script, most countries are actually not that convenient to start a business to be successful. So to me, I mean, I. I'm not a defender of the US, but they still have the best ease of doing business. They still have the best higher education. Yes, lower education is getting a lot of difficulty. I mean, a lot of Africans would go there and do amazing overnight. Well, not overnight, but yeah, and we are able to come back with our education and with our a little bit better high disposable incomes because of the system. And I think it's not fair when we sometimes say that, yeah, I went to the US, I was able to get this education, I'm doing well, and I'm even making $1 million. I have opened this, but now I want to expand it. It's not an easy because if you do flip that and you try to do here in Ethiopia, for example, start something in the next 10 years and be able to even expand to the US, that's even impossible. So I think it's not comparing apple to apple, and it's not fair.
Messi,
Very
you're absolutely right. Let me just say one thing really quick. I remember, like, okay, we all had the experience of being a teenager where you compared yourself to others, right? And that left you a little bit of insecurity and so forth. And then as we mature, we start to look inside and compare ourselves to the values that we set for ourselves. So the problem right now when we talk about the United States versus other countries around the world, it's like being a teenager and looking and comparing yourself to others. But what we have to do is take a more mature approach and compare ourselves to the ideals that were set forth by our founding fathers. When we compare ourselves to that, we have really taken a lot of back steps. Okay. And that is the thing is I think that we're digressing. We're not the free country that we used to be. Okay, yes, maybe relative to other countries, but that's not the bar. That's not the standard that I look for. And so if you try to leave this country, there's an exit tax. And the exit tax is a form of people control. So desperate governments always try to control money with capital controls and individuals with people controls. So take Cuba, for example. After Castro came to power, his government made Cuban citizens apply for exit visas before they left the island. They were not easy to get. The Soviet Union, North Korea, and others have also used similar restrictions. Preventing people from leaving has always been a hallmark of authoritarianism. And it's hardly shocking that productive people are leaving the US tax system. The US government doesn't like this one bit. Naturally, it would be, it would prefer to squeeze every last drop out of its best milk cows. But to keep them from leaving, the US government has imposed a so called exit tax on Americans who renounce their citizenship. You have to read the tea leaves. We are not the country we used to be. That's my complaint. I often get said, oh, you're not a patriot. No, I am a patriot. I want us to get back closer to the US Constitution.
Come to England. We don't have such things.
Okay.
I'm very surprised by hearing anybody saying that Americans want to leave America because of the tax system. To my Danish mind, it doesn't make any sense
I didn't
at
say
all.
that.
It sounds
Just for
like it
let
sounds
me
like a
interject just for
mental lecture.
clarification.
So I would love to have like somebody sharing an article with some facts about this because
Yeah,
to me it's very
let me
surprising.
clarify. Just for that's not what I said. What I said, I'm not saying Americans are leaving because of the taxes. What I'm saying is, of the Americans that are leaving, and let's understand, we have 330 million Americans. So in 2020, I think 6,700 left. Okay, that's a small percentage. But of that percentage, I think they're more wealthy than not wealthy within that group. And there's a good, a large percentage, and I don't have the numbers, but they are leaving, a lot of them, for tax reasons.
They
I
are.
want to just jump in on this. So I agree with what George said, definitively. I think that Susie's points are so well observed and well made that until you've had the American experience, it's hard to understand. But I think what is being witnessed is that the most mobile are the ones that are most valuable because they can work anywhere. They can do what they do, as Tyler does, anywhere. And as I believe that the opportunity to those people that are saying, "Oh, our dream is to come to America," you have where people are saying, "It's apples and oranges." You can come to America, make $1 million, pay a $500,000 in tax. Let's say it's not, but let's say, right, and your living expenses are going to be more than a $500,000. So it doesn't matter if your expenses are as much as you're making and you're not saving anything. You're not actually becoming wealthy unless you believe that you're enriching your family by giving them a great education and a great opportunity to build a new life in America, and that you're saying that that's the sort of hurdle. The issue is that the world that they're being launched into is not necessarily competitive with the lifestyle in other countries. And I think the opportunity, this is the real big picture here now, is for European countries that have good, uh, social democracy and that have a good healthcare system, a good educational system, can now compete with what America had that was special, which was ability to create these technology companies. These companies are dominating our world, and there aren't European examples, and there aren't examples from the rest of the world. And what we need to realize is that the decentralized world, where you don't need to be located in America to succeed. You can be meta to the nation state. You can be part of a digital nation that has self sovereignty and that has privacy and that has the ability to protect their own assets. This is the great promise, because the people who are not in America will unite together and say, hey, we can work together and increase our opportunity, because the opportunity is in technology. It's not in businesses that are necessarily, traditional businesses. That's where the future for our children is. So I think that everything that's been said is extremely interesting and relevant.
Can I just make
I
a
will
quick
have to
comment?
leave in a second. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, go
Sarah,
ahead,
I
Ceci.
actually wanted to thank you for pinning the link that I gave to you. It's a research from 2017, and I'm tongue in cheek now. You are more likely to achieve the American dream if you live in social democratic Denmark with very high tax systems. I don't know. If you guys are curious about this topic, you should read this, and we'll consider this discussion in another wonderful tech news around the world. And thank you so much to everybody who contributed to make me confused at a much higher level than before. Thank you, Susie from
Yeah,
Denmark.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think it really depends on where you're coming from because it's a very relative statement. Coming from Singapore and Japan, which is developed country and much safer to live here, I personally have no preference to want to live in US unless it's for business reason. And I do have many people around me who used to have green card, US green card. They actually gave up their green card because of tax reasons. So this is just a point of reference.
Yeah, Greek Taiwanese as well gave up
And
green
our
card.
chancellor got into trouble because he had a green card.
Well, I think there are other issues. I gave up mine. I mean, it just became a pain each time I travel. They're like, we gave it to you to live in the US, not still travel with your Canadian passport. So it's just they hassle me each time I enter the US, and I'm like, okay, here you go. So there are many, many reasons I think people give up their green card. At least that was the reason for me for giving it up.
Okay.
And again, one last thing: the numbers are small, but again, it's all about the trend, right? In the year 2000, we had 400. In 2020, we had 6,700, and I think the growing number of Americans renouncing their citizenships is an important sign of what's to come. It's like the canary in the coal mine, and I think it's just something to pay attention to.
It definitely is, and it's going to get much worse.
Okay.
I didn't hear Thailand making any comments because you have been living in Asia for so long, having around, living around places in America and Europe and in Asia. You should be able to share a lot of relevant comments. Why did you decide to stay outside of America?
One key reason to stay outside of America is if you stay outside for 330 days in a year, you get $100,000 tax deduction without renouncing your citizenship. Which, for a lot of, by the way, just one way to break that down. Let's say you make $100,000 a year working online from any country where and that $100,000 of income is going to be taxed at around 35%. So you're going to pay about $35,000 in tax. That's about $100 per day. So if you're making $100,000 per year living in the US, you're paying $100 a day in taxes. So you can live outside of the US and keep that $100 per day. So you're
Tyler,
essentially you're paying
you know where's
You
the only place that beats that?
Mhm.
Puerto Rico is the only tax haven for U.S. citizen.
Right.
You live there. I believe it's 6 months and a day, and you
I
pay
thought
four
three
percent
months.
corporate
Yeah.
tax,
Yeah.
and get this, you pay 0% capital gains tax.
Right. That's why all the folks are down there. Yeah. But
But
Tyler, you
Tyler,
only
continue with
spend
yours because
five
I think
days a
that's very
year
helpful.
in
Tyler,
US.
could you continue with yours because I think that's very helpful because
Yeah,
there's
yes.
probably a number of people in the audience who don't understand
yeah.
that.
Right. If you're making $100,000 a year in income, and then your tax bill comes, and you talk to your accountant, and they say, okay, you got to pay your taxes. You're in the 35% tax bracket because you make 100,000 a year. That means you're writing a check for $35,000 a year. That over the course of 365 days is about $100 per day that you are paying to wake up in the continental United States. The U.S. has what's called the Foreign Earned Income Tax Credit, meaning if you live outside of the continental U.S. for 330 days per year, so you can visit the U.S. for up to 30 days per year. But if you live outside of the U.S., you do not have to pay that $100 per day every morning that you wake up. So, by the way, that $35,000 a year that you would save by living in pretty much any country in the world, in many countries of the world, that's all you need to live for an entire year. So essentially, you'd be living for basically free in places like Southeast Asia, where you could easily live in Vietnam or even Thailand for.
Not in Singapore.
I didn't say Singapore.
We are
So
we are Southeast Asia, Tyler.
I get that, but let him
Yeah,
go on
Yeah.
those
because the
can both
audience
be
needs
true.
to.
You can be. I didn't say all. I said in places in Southeast Asia like Vietnam and Thailand. I very specifically didn't say Singapore. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you said. My husband
I
does
very
that. I
specifically
mean,
didn't say Japan either. So
yeah.
my point is, if for $35,000 a year, you can live incredibly well in Vietnam, for example. You would be
Hey,
living very, very
Tyler, I got a question for you.
yes. So go ahead.
Um, so have you given thought to living 3 months in Puerto Rico? Because if you live 3 months in Puerto Rico, you can live 9 months everywhere else, and you get
But
an
it's a
even
U.S.
better.
territory. That's a U.S.
Yeah,
territory.
I know, but I was assuming that Tyler was a U.S. citizen.
Yes. No, I'm aware
Okay.
of the Puerto Rico approach. I have many friends doing that. Yeah.
Don't you have to be like outside of the US 11 months out of 12, right? That's what we do. Like, I mean, I gave up mine, but my husband is still American with American passport. So we live in Ethiopia 11 months, and
Yep.
even when we go back to the US, we make sure it's not over a
30
month.
days.
So,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's see, 11 months is about 330 days, as per what Tyler just mentioned.
You're making the same point. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to through the rest of the tech headlines and then the tweets. There's a few headlines left to go through. One is Crypto.com announces it's reducing the rewards for the Visa enabled Crypto.com Visa cards, dropping the rewards from 5% to 2%. And the Washington Post says that addiction scholars say that cryptocurrency is that make it more addictive than sports betting, gambling, and traditional financial investing.
It's a 24/7 market. There's nothing better for people who are degens, which is why they drove that marketplace. And with regard to crypto.com, of course, the introductory offers as paid for by your friendly VCs dry up when markets change.
The Bloomberg has a report that crypto mining could consume nearly 25% of the electricity supply in Argentina's Tierra del Fuego province until October, risking an energy grid collapse. That sounds like some serious FUD going on there. I'm not even familiar with Argentina's Tierra del Fuego province.
What it's saying is that hard currency that you can be made in Bitcoin by using cheap electricity is more valuable than the Argentinian currency, which is destabilizing the government and putting them yet again into another financial crisis.
Hey, Tyler, geography wise on Tierra del Fuego, that's down at the very bottom south of Patagonia.
Okay,
So, I mean, it's not like it's an energy haven down there anyway,
right,
but it's
right,
very interesting that they're locating stuff in those areas too.
That's
right.
not just in Argentina, though. There's a good article on Bloomberg this weekend about the impact that Bitcoin mining has had on parts of New York, which is a good read. I'll pin it in the back story.
Okay,
And the
moving.
reason why they launched a moratorium on proof of work mining in New York State, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
So after knocking out the internet in Kherson, a Russia-occupied Ukrainian city, Russian forces reinstated internet service but rerouted it through Russia's internet of Rostelcom. So that's the extension of Russia's internet into Ukraine. Next, from the Wall Street Journal, Activision's CEO Bobby Kotick could walk away with about $500 million after the Microsoft deal. And in a lawsuit, Apple alleges that a system on a chip startup called Revos stole trade secrets after poaching more than 40 engineers from Apple, and that at least two of those engineers took gigabytes of confidential information. And
And their brains, they own their brains and all of their thoughts and all of their ideas and all of their patents. They are owned by Apple forever.
the
Yeah, but the key thing out of this is, I mean, in the past when we didn't have all this tracking, people could scarf some things and not really be noticed. So it's the security systems that are set up in these organizations. It makes it very clear that as you exit a company, be very careful on what you think is yours and what is the company's, because you're monitored and you can be sued.
Okay. Next up is Amazon plans to support the popular EPUB ebook format for Send to Kindle. Facebook plans 4 VR headsets by 2024. Sources say high-end MR headset called Cambria, one set for 2021, could debut in September before its successor in 2024. Okay, those are your big boring headlines today. Now we go to the tweets. The first tweet I have for today is from Regent that Andreessen Horowitz plans 500 million investment in Indian startups. I recall Sequoia just announced exactly the same thing, if I'm not mistaken, about $500 million for India, like within 1 week of each other. Kind of interesting. They both just also announced the kind of incubators in the same week, like a month ago. Very interesting. So $500 million in India for Andreessen, and another, if I recall correctly, $500 million from Sequoia. So there's $1 billion of startup funding going into India this month.
This is how America exports its brand of surveillance capitalism.
California, Thomas Tong found this one from USA Today. That's not a publication we read very often. In fact, I think that might be only the third time we've ever covered USA Today. Renewable electricity powered California 100% for the first time in history on Saturday. California's electricity demand was 100% met by renewable energy for the first time in history. There you go. Here, hold on. I have a sound clip for that. Where is it? Audio effects. Audio effects. There's the clap. If that's true, and California was powered entirely by renewable energy, that's fucking fantastic.
Check the weather.
Yeah. The next.
Taylor.
Yes. Hold on.
Taylor.
Hold on.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nancy. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that there was also an amazing, huge investment in Africa and a renewable solar company that's working in Africa and Asia with 260 million. But sorry about that.
Okay. Now here.
Can I ask an allied question just to the room and to you? Has anyone been talking about this heat wave in India? And obviously, the renewables number is to do with the perfect day of weather. On that day, which was just not too hot, not too cold, so you didn't have too much AC nor a need for heating. So, with that in mind, I'm assuming that that's the case. Does anyone have any information that they can share about what's going on in India and how is this impacting?
I have what I think might be a little bit of personal information that indeed they're experiencing parts of India are getting up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius or whatever it is, like very uninhabitable temperatures. And Pakistan as well. And it's very central India, as I'm sure Vinay can verify. And the problem long term, or even actually very relatively short term, is that the water table is dropped. India is already having rather strong water stress in, Bangalore most notably. I think Hyderabad. India's going to start having very serious water problems. They already are. But what's interesting to me is I'm just I call it a 2.5 hour flight east of India in Thailand, and here in Southeast Asia, which is pretty much just directly east of India, we are experiencing uncharacteristic, almost unimaginable rain. So I think a lot of that moisture is rising into the clouds from India, coming over to Southeast Asia and dumping rain in a time of year when we're not even expecting it. It's really unbelievable the amount of rain that we're getting over here. This should be a dry season at the end of the dry season, end of April. We never had a dry season. It never stopped raining since the rainy season back in November.
Is that going to affect your crops?
Sure, but in a strangely good way, I imagine. It seems to be a very good problem to have. And by the way, the rain is also keeping the temperature down, strangely. because we get more cloud cover, which and more rain, and both those things make it seem far less hot. Anyway, no doubt
So go
it'll.
back to India. So go back
Yeah,
to India. So
sure. Go ahead.
no, I just wondered if anyone knows about, in any more detail about why we're not seeing coverage of this, or what the long-term implications are going to be, and the knock-on effects. I just
They're going to
wondered
run
if
out of
anyone
water.
had any
They're going to run.
domain knowledge.
You're talking a billion people who are going to run out of water.
So you know, what's the inter alia? Has anyone got?
No,
Where's David when
no,
you need him?
no. So there's a lot of. I mean, this is Vinay from Bangalore. So there's a lot of conversation about the weather here. Delhi and its areas got the hottest days in 72 years, right? So interestingly enough, the prediction for the monsoon, which is uh, expected in June, is that it's going to be a normal to average to normal monsoon. So everyone's doing that. And the one advantage is, Tyler, small uh, data difference from what you just said is in some areas, because of COVID and everything else, the water tables actually just got renewed in the last couple of years because companies, etc. But there are parts of India that are going to be severely distressed, and there's a huge push on renewable energy. And Tyler, you and I have talked about it. I'm putting a huge bet into water access, particularly AWGs and other stuff. So there's a massive investment long term. They're linking up rivers, creating the big issue we're going to have. And there's probably going to be increased conflict with both Pakistan and China because both of them are creating some dams that are going to stop some of those rivers flowing into India. So there's
Ouch.
going to be
Yeah.
a lot more water conflict coming up.
Yeah. Oh, by
But
the way,
there's,
So
on
there's,
a
that.
conflict
there's a
over
plan
a
B and a
conflict.
plan C.
So the meta game, what you're saying is there's going to be a conflict over water, and I think we put in the back channel. I was at Lake Mead observing the massive reduction in water that is also going to be available here in the west of the US. So this it seems as a looming thing that we should be looking out for as climate change and its impacts and technologies that are solving this problem. So if anyone is aware of water technologies, I think that would be something we should have our eyes open for.
Absolutely. I think water technology, I always wonder if there hasn't been any kind of innovation where we can actually preserve when it's raining so much. Here in Ethiopia, we kind of alternate between like flooding in one season, and now the country, millions of people are facing, starvation, and the WFP and UNICEF are really screaming because it didn't rain the last 3 seasons in a row. So, I mean, how do we miss that? We have so much water going, so much rivers and lakes, as well as so much raining and flooding. And all of a sudden, within 3 seasons, we are now in drought. So, isn't
So,
there technology
so,
to fix
so,
that?
yeah, Messi, there's actually a lot of water innovation, a lot of it technology driven. Just back channel me. I'll point you to a couple of places. I know I'm working with two companies that are doing a lot of things in Africa. I don't know if Irvin's here, but Irvin and I are talking about something in Africa as well. So just back channel me and I'll point you in the right direction.
Hi, this is Pat.
I'd be
And
interested in that too, please.
sorry, I wanted to add on something to what Nicholas was asking about. First of all, where is the information about what's actually happening on the ground in India regarding this heat condition? And to me, what I heard Nicholas was potentially wanting to express was the fact that all of that stuff isn't seem to be reflected in the rest of the media around the world. So here's something that's happening that's absolutely tragic and devastating with implications across many levels within the subcontinent, not really receiving huge attention over here, even though there are similar conditions in North America, for instance, and in Europe that relate to heat conditions, water shortages, or too much water, or all of that. It just seems that we are really not integrated as a planet in whether we think there is any importance in news that happens in other countries. And tragically, we then miss out on all of these things because, yes, Messi, there are so many different solutions that are around for water, for renewables, for anything, lots of different solutions, which all are not necessarily good or going to be the ultimate solutions, but there are lots of people working on lots of solutions that do not hit the news or hit anybody further than the ones they can reach through some simple marketing methods somewhere from a small startup somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, the point is really that it's very exciting how on Tech News of the Day, this particular room, that there's more and more questions being asked about climate changes and about new developments. And that is really how we're going to extend the discussion further and wider, because there are situations and it concerns us all because it affects us all. The extreme conditions in climate really are all around the world, and we as human beings experience them the same way. We die because it's too hot, we die because there's not enough water, we die because the soil is eroded. And a moment ago I was thinking, Chris Phonoff has gone off someplace, but he would have given you exactly why that water is not refilling the water tables in so many countries, and how the soil has been eroded to such an extent that there's nothing there to soak up. You know, it doesn't soak into the ground, it just runs and runs back into the ocean. Anyhow, it's such a complicated situation, but it's one that's facing us all. And sadly, COVID, as well as the very disastrous war in Ukraine, have actually taken a lot of eyes away from the issue. And I'm going to stop in about 30 seconds, because going back to the situation with India, it's very interesting, the political complications of its alliances, India and all the other countries around it. But because of the more closer tie with Russia, perhaps, there is an idea that they might be able to get more fossil fuels, more coal or more oil from Russia and so on. But interesting, India, a big power like the UK, have all and US have all reverted back to fossil fuels, and India, a country with such vast inequalities and differences between poor and rich, the government has been trying to reopen new coal mines, coal being the dirtiest fossil fuel ever. They want to give out new licenses for new locations for coal mines. And within recent months, one of the leading commentators on the Indian political situation has reported that because of activism and climate change activists, the Supreme Court in India are hearing challenges towards these new mining contracts that are being offered by the government. It's really quite scandalous that here we are with all these problems. Governments are reverting to producing new drillings, new oil here in the UK. You know, it's ridiculous. For all these difficulties around us, shouldn't we be thinking better? Shouldn't we be thinking more collectively, more universally? When will that come? I don't know. It depends on if people like us keep talking about it more. Thank you. This is Pat. I'm done.
Okay. BB found an article about the Apple car, that it may cost more than 100,000 US dollars and use premium titanium material in its design. The Apple car may be called Project Titan, as the team in Cupertino plans to use a lot of premium titanium material in the car's design, reports a renowned leaker. Okay, we'll stay tuned for that. Professor Osif found one.
Talking about renowned leakers, the BBC just released that there's been an inquiry has been launched as to the leak of the Supreme Court draft.
Professor Osif found one about a Chinese aircraft carrier has led a larger than usual strike group to train in the Western Pacific as tensions rise over Taiwan. And the next one is from Joe Williams, that Amazon is investing in robots to work alongside humans in the factories. Backed by the biggest retailers, robots are arriving in warehouses to give humans a hand. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the rising wages in the Amazon factories at all. I'm sure that has no factor at all in the how much money they're willing to spend on these robots.
And the labor unions.
The next is from Sharon that the Nextdoor app has a new reminder which aims to cool down heated conversations between neighbors. The social media platform Nextdoor is predicting whether a comment thread is likely to provoke an argument, and that's a very clever use of sentiment analysis. And the next is from Jeff G. That about Wired is covering the Chinese EV that sells for $5,000, and they've done a trial of it. Wuling's Mini EV, made in partnership with General Motors, outsells Tesla Model 3 in China and costs less than adding CarPlay to a Ferrari for just $5,000.
Can we
Four-seat.
just go back one story? Can you just go back
Sure.
one story and say the sentiment analysis AI tool basically makes you not get into an argument. So it basically removes debate.
I'm not sure precisely how it's. Maybe I think it gives people notifications when they start using words that will become inflammatory. I think that would be the easiest use of that technology is they can
But you
detect
see
that.
what you see what I'm saying. When
Yeah,
those technologies step in to moderate speech,
yeah,
that you don't establish social consensus. What it's doing is the algorithm is taking over.
sure.
It perceptions control reality. So if your perceptions are guided, your reality is augmented. And when that is happening, using all of your data and then adding AI to it, you really are at, talk about machines giving you a hand. It's a hand with a knife and it's stabbing you right in the back.
Yeah, I suspect that they aren't the only ones doing that. I suspect Twitter does this, where if you include certain inflammatory keywords, like the word actually, it might be a fine example, it just kind of inevitably provokes confrontation in a subtle way. But we do have these words in English, and certainly other languages do too.
Actually,
Actually, it's got to be the best example of a rather innocent word that implies you're an idiot, and here's precisely how.
The
Um,
Nigeto in Japanese sounds like a nigger. That is one joke in the scam words.
well, you have the Chinese version of how to say that one, which really will get people riled up. Um, yeah. The Wuling review from Wired ends by saying, we may not legally be able to get a hold of the Mini EV as it sells in China, but there is an outside chance GM will be using the know-how gained from producing this budget electric car to release a US and European EV that sells below $10,000.
do we not think that there will be a tipping point on the Tesla premium in terms of their stock price when people will be able to buy much more affordable electric vehicles and attach their own iPad? Do we not see that maybe this is peak Tesla?
Right. Well, that could explain why Elon just sold a whole bunch of Tesla stock.
Seemed like that to me. I'm not sure that I would diversify to Twitter, but if Twitter's going to become a bank, then it makes sense.
Yeah, so Nicholas, I'm curious about that because I've only ever been in a Tesla on the sort of normal saloon EV. I've never been in any other EV car. So would it be like, if Tesla is the Apple of EVs, then we might have a lot of, great Android equivalents in EV, but Apple still keeps its premium. So I wonder if that's not going to turn like that, or will be literally, as you mentioned, just put an iPad. Is the self-driving tech going to be a differentiator enough for Tesla versus the others, or are they going to catch up? Or just experience, right?
I've been in
The
a few of
experience, the
them.
little touches, the little things that Tesla people get excited about may not all translate to other vehicles.
I've been in a few of them, and they all have what the excitement, I think, of the Tesla was people understanding the torque that comes from having an electric engine. And so it's the acceleration, affects your stomach. So that experience is something that excites every person who has never driven a supercar, right? Because it gives you a supercar effect. That, however, is the same for all electric vehicles now. So even if you're in a Chevy Bolt or Volt, you're going to get that, that feeling of the torquiness of the engine, much like you do with a golf car. Yeah, I think that the creature comforts and the price will start to distinguish the market, just as it does with every other car, and that includes the Rivian, which I hear good things about, which I haven't been in.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another Tech News Around the World. Thank you for joining us, and do join us again tomorrow. Bring your tweets and your headlines and your interesting thoughts, and we will jump